Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Public Interest Technology Colloquium. This one is dedicated to ethics and emerging technology. My name is Katina Michael, and I'm a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society and also the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence. And I also direct the Center for Society Policy Engineering in the SPEC group. And it's my absolute honor today to welcome Professor Rafael Capurro, a philosopher who's currently affiliated with the University of Praetoria. And his talk will generally address the philosophy and ethics of artificial intelligence. And we're hoping today that it'll be very much a conversation. The first hour will be likely Rafael and myself tag teaming about issues in relation to the ethics of AI, the ethics of science and tech, and emerging technologies. Rafael is an author of so many incredible books. He's also very generous in his co-editing, the beginning of a new journal, which started many years ago, the IRIE, and has been a rapporteur for so many different topics, particularly in the European Commission, and has written books with a former PIC Colloquium presenter, Michael Eldred, and of course, Daniel Nagel. And we think about topics like digital who-ness, the identity, privacy, and freedom in the cyber world, robotics and ethics, as we said, Homo Digitalis. And more recently, his book, co-edited with Kurtzer Bester, Johannes Brits, and Fisher on Nelson Mandela, a reader on information ethics. I'd like to welcome you, Rafael.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Katina. It's a big pleasure and a big honor for me to be here among colleagues and friends. I would like to be with you in Australia, much better than here, but it's okay. That is the way technology helps us, also information technology and artificial intelligence, just to keep in contact through the distance.
Rafael, I'm very touched. We met in 2010 at the International Symposium on Technology and Society, where you gave a stirring talk on outcomes of work that you were doing with the European Commission, a group dedicated to looking at ethical aspects of technology and science. In particular, we were intrigued to hear from you on ICT implants in the human body, an opinion piece that was dedicated and was so important in so many ways. It sort of provided a stake in the ground for how we look at intrusive technology and understand the ethical issues around these new technologies, emerging technologies of the future. You're a very generous man, and we very much appreciate that you've given up your evening time to be with us. A short biography, Rafael. You were born in 1945 in Montevideo in Uruguay.
Yeah.
You hold a licentiate in philosophy from the University del Salvador in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And also you received your PhD in philosophy from Düsseldorf University and completed your postdoctoral teaching qualification, your habilitation in practical philosophy from Stuttgart University. And then you taught in a number of places, so many, I can't mention all of them, but a long stint at the Institute of Philosophy at Stuttgart University, and then in information management and information ethics at the Stuttgart Media University, both in Germany. For our audience today, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your life. I'm intrigued by your life and I'm intrigued by your journey. I always have been. But how does a young person in Montevideo end up in Germany working on projects in the European Commission and creating such an important contribution? Can you tell us about growing up in Uruguay?
Well, telling about oneself is a little bit dangerous because you have some kind of egocentric position. So it's not so unproblematic. I wrote a text about my life written in the third person, which is an interesting way just to avoid some kind of egocentric. And I call this text living in translation. And I think this is a little bit what my life has been until now and continues being. Not only translation between languages, but also cultures and different settings and the different worlds you address already in Uruguay, and I was a Jesuit for 8 years in Argentina and Chile. So this was an important part of my life too, my heritage, also from the philosophical point of view. It was the foundations of what I became later on. And then when I came to Germany, it was absolutely the contrary. It was the Atomic Research Center in Karlsruhe. Why I came here? Because I wanted to study documentation. Well, I wanted to earn money, just to put it more simply. I didn't want to go back to Uruguay to my family. I wanted to make my life by myself. And so I got a scholarship at the Atomic Research Center in Karlsruhe, which was donated by the Atomic Research Energy in Vienna from the United Nations. So it was supposed to be here, I was supposed to be here for 2 years, and now I'm 50 years. So a long journey until now in Germany and Europe and many other countries, as you said. And I think what makes my life some kind of, when I can generalize my life, so just to get out of the contingencies of an individual, is just the experience of translating. And I think this is a kind of universal point of view of my life when I think what I have been doing. Well, translating from one culture to the other. So not me, what is important, my contingency and the events in my life, which are, of course, always unpredictable and not so important for others, I think. But the experience of translating and the experience of talking to each other and dialogue, I think. This is, I think, the message which I have learned through many, many experiences in many, many countries, and facing the challenges of not understanding myself or not understanding others, or others not understanding me. And this is a hermeneutic experience, of course. This is what I think we need in the present moment, in which our world is just breaking into pieces, separating each other from everything else, physically and ecologically and politically and so on. So what I have learned in my particular life is try to keep in dialogue and to just let the other asking me and challenging me. So it's less starting from myself, but starting from the other and facing the other. See, this is the challenge we as humans have, is to put it in a more general way. Not only me, it's we as humans facing the other. The other is, of course, can be interpreted in many ways, but I don't want to go now into this. But I think this is the experience when we are born and facing the other, the mother, the father, the family, and so on. The city in which you are born, the language you learn, and so on. So the experiences of the other, and I think the way we learn to deal with these experiences is basic for the rest of the life when you start in the family. Well, sorry, I cannot. If you want me to go into deeper details, less the contingency, but more the reading of this contingency from the general perspective. So, of course, I can do it. Very, very happy to do it. And these two kinds of readings is something I learned also from philosophy, particularly from Hegel, who always says in the phenomenology of spirit, the perspective of the natural conscious, and then when he says wir, which is the absolute spirit, of course, the perspective of the general, the universal, and so he goes up and down. And so I think this is, of course, I'm not a Hegelian. Don't believe in this, in the absolute spirit and absolute knowledge, but I learned from Hegel. And I think this is something each of one of us can try to do, just to jump into the universal and come back into the particular. That's it, I think. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Rafael. And I will pop in your live translation link in the chat in a moment for people to visit, to read more about your incredible upbringing and also your studies. Thank you for sharing that online. It's very inspiring for us to read and to learn about your journey. Tell us when and how you got entangled with the study of technology. So you mentioned to us the culture, understanding culture and the other and being understood. Tell us now how technology came into your life as an area of study.
Well, it was very practical because I got a scholarship, as I told you, at the Atomic Research Center at the 70s, 71, I came to Germany, so 50 years ago. So atomic energy is what now IT or artificial intelligence is about. Everybody was talking about atomic energy and spending a lot of money about atomic energy. So it was the zeitgeist, we can say, the spirit of the time. It was this technology. And I was in this research center of Karlsruhe, one of the most modern research centers. So with a lot of physicists and chemists and so on, all the natural scientists around me and technologists, and all the time talking about energy, atomic energy, and so on. So I was supposed to learn documentation. It was called at that time. So what Google and Co are doing now, but at that time it was the beginning, as you know, in the 70s. And so searching with keywords was an experience. Wow, you just could sit in the front of the computer and it writes 3 or 4 keywords, and the search are done in Japan or in the United States, and so you get the results. And this is the bibliographic results. It was the bibliographic databases at that time. And the reason why it was so important was the Cold War, because there was a database built in Vienna by the Atomic Research Energy Center, which is called INIS, International Network of Information of my English is a problem. Nuclear Information Center, exactly, system, information system, INIS. And why it was created a bibliographic database by the United Nations, which is not so normally you would say this should be done by universities or research centers, but not by the UN. And the reason was political, because it was a Sputnik shock. And the Americans perceived that they didn't know what physicists were searching particularly in the Soviet Union. And so it was just to open the door to get information from beyond the wall in Europe, the separation between Eastern and Western Europe. And so to invite them to contribute to this database. And this was one of the first international databases at all. So it's very interesting because it was not really, of course it was science, but it was political, the interest. And it was the first experiences to create big databases and make searches around the continents and so on, between the continents and so on. So for me, it was really interesting also because I get in contact with a lot of people from different countries, because UN, as you know, I don't know how many countries participated at that time. And so we got a lot of visits in Karlsruhe from different countries and so on, from China and of course from Russia and so on and so on. So this was the beginning, but the beginning is not so different from what happened 40 years later when you now do searches with Google or whatever. And this is what I see now. And also artificial intelligence, although it was also starting the discussion about this, but it was an academic discussion at that time. We spoke a lot about, you know, how kind of image of the humans you can get with artificial intelligence and robotics and Stanislav Lem and all these discussions about whether computers can think or not, and it was inside the academic world, this discussion. And what I see the difference now is that this is a social discussion, a social and economic and political discussion. This makes a big difference when we talk about artificial intelligence now and when we talk about it 40 years ago. Sometimes it's like equivocal. Sometimes I think we are talking about different things. We think we talk about the same, but when we talk about ethics of artificial intelligence 40 years ago, it is not the same as when we talk about artificial intelligence ethics now. That's my experience at the moment.
As you progressed and you saw the changes and the types of discussions, I mean, you've mentioned culture, you've mentioned politics, you mentioned power, discussions changing to more social and societal level. What have you seen in terms of the impact of technology?
You mean the impact in all these years or now?
If you can address both. So the impact over all this time, and then today, what are we seeing?
Yeah. I think in the beginning was an impact within the science community. When we started creating databases, bibliographic databases, and so on other kinds of databases, it was a problem how we can communicate better between scientists and scientific communities. And this changed dramatically in the 90s with the invention of the internet. In a few years, it was a social event, and everybody could do the same and communicate and so on. And this was a sharp historical cut, I think, the invention of the internet in the 90s. And it opened all these technologies which were created before to the public. Yeah, and I think this is the beginning of, we call it information society and so on. But it was in the 80s. It was not until the internet was created, invented. And then if we think about the impact on society, the first years were not so much concerned with ethical issues. So legal issues, yes, but less concerned with ethical issues. Although people like Joseph Weizenbaum, already in the 70s, raised the questions dealing with computer ethics at that time. And Weizenbaum was very active also in Europe when he came back from the United States and lived several years in Germany. But again, it was in the 80s still more an academic discussion, what computers can do and machines who think, all these famous titles of books and people and so on. And so, but for us as students and academics was fascinating to deal with these issues. I remember a famous conference organized by Christiane Floyd, who was the first woman in informatics in Germany, in Hamburg University, and then he taught a lot of time in Berlin. And he organized a fantastic conference on constructivism and constructing reality and so on, and ethical issues. And it was for me one of the best conferences I've ever had the privilege to participate. And many famous informaticians and computer scientists were there. So, but again, it was academic discussion. It was fantastic for us academics to think about all these things and so on, and how if matter matters or not. When you create a robot, we want to think like we think. No, it depends on the matter of the robot. If robot says I'm thirsty, but he's not this kind of matter we have, then don't believe him or her or whatever. So. So these kind of discussions were fantastic. Also moved by important books like I'm thinking about oh, my memory is at the moment cut. So, but you know all these famous authors at the time, the 80s and 90s, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it exploded, and everybody started dealing with this independently if you are a computer scientist or not, and the politicians. And you hear now, we have now at the moment we are participating in the national elections in Germany. And the first word the politicians talk about is artificial intelligence. Well, it's strange. Of course, it is an important issue, but it is new. And because the impact is in all levels of society. And you say, okay, it was also 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but the country needs a push in this direction now. And so it's a politicum. But when I look back to the 70s, many of the issues I hear about that were discussed at the 70s and the 80s in a very deep way. Yeah.
Rafael, what are the new challenges that we have identified today with respect to these emerging technologies? What are the new ethical concerns? Are they the same as it was, but just more impactful today because more is possible through new innovations? Or are there really different ethical challenges that we're facing?
Well, compared with the 70s, they were different because of the social impact in the everyday life, just in the family, in schools, you know, and with the cell phones and all kind of processes are being managed by artificial intelligence, as we call it, to use this word, but of course the programs and interconnected and so on between each other. And so this creates a kind of feeling that things are going to get better and easier, but at the same time, the issue of surveillance and überveillance, as you call it, you created this word, fantastic word, is becoming more and more important, also in politics and the economy and so on. The challenge is how far can we let artificial intelligence, which is then the programs we create, do things that we normally do by ourselves with freedom of choices. It's a similar way as the one stated by Dreyfus in the 70s, similar way, but different now because it is the bigger impact, and the economists and the economy itself and politics are very scared sometimes about what is possible and what they don't manage, and they don't have the power about that. Particularly in time of elections and so on. So it is a strange world, and it's beginning now in a little bit chaotic way. We have no kind of universal rules of well-doing and well-living. We have a lot of declaration about this. It's okay from UN and UNESCO, so a lot of declaration. Everybody's writing declarations about ethics of AI and writing nice texts and so on. But the problem is more concrete. Who owns all these issues, all these programs, all these companies? Just to put an example, you know, communication is the basis of society, of course. But we have big companies, I will not name any of them now, yes. Who are private companies worldwide. And so the problem is if you can run a free society, a democratic society, with communication in the hands of private companies. I think it won't work. Also, it won't work just with laws. It is like having streets and other ways of communicating in private hands. If you go out of your house and the street is private, yeah, it won't work for the places and so on. So we have to become aware that communication is a social good, and what went wrong, I think, the last years is that we will, in our call it capitalist and liberal society, we just thought it can be done by the private sector. In partly it can be done by the private sector, but it is too strong also worldwide. And I think this is, for me, one of the biggest challenges for democratic societies: how to create spaces, public spaces in the digital era, which are digital spaces not run by private companies. This is the way I can put it. Yeah.
Rafael, where do you see us going in the next period of time, whatever time period into the future, if we keep on this trajectory that we're on? Give us a description of the world we might live in if we progress down the path that we seem to be on at the moment.
May I ask you to formulate it a little bit longer, maybe just so that I can understand better what you.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have described for us the basis of, in the 1970s, of all of this work around atomic energy, and then the change that's occurred, the impact of the internet, robotics, artificial intelligence as we see it today, the impact on society, the closed environment behind a paywall, as opposed to the open sort of democratic approach where ownership is by the people, perhaps, where citizenry and the publics have an injection of their voice. If we continue, particularly in the current challenges of pandemic, to normalize this kind of technological adoption, what kind of picture could you paint for us about where we might be in 10 to 20 years, maybe?
Very difficult to say. When I look back at my time, what I thought was possible in the 70s, it had nothing to do with what had happened later, 20 years later, nothing to do.
Yes.
We never imagined that two computers could communicate from person to person, personal computers at that time would be possible. This combined with the pandemic and the issues of the political issues of the pandemic, the power of the state to stop basic laws of free society, so not allow people to do this and do that and so on and so on. It's sometimes as a format of a non-democratic society, but it is still under democratic basis. And what I see in this crisis is that nature is sending us messages. The ecology movement is a little bit older than just 2 years ago. It is also 30, 40 years ago, but we didn't believe it so much what those people were saying at the time when the Green parties were created. But now it's not just about the Green parties, it's the Earth itself, which is, and the viruses, of course, and the complexity of the globalization of mobility. So it is a very, very complex situation in which we must live with, I put it like this, live with nature, but this is not a good word. We have forgotten nature. I think this is a problem. Too much oriented for technology and the digital, which is fine. I like the digital and I enjoy it speaking to other people now in this arena. But nature is very strong, and the Earth is the only Earth we have. So how can we combine technology and ecology? I think this is the challenge, basic challenge of the next generation, the generation today, because what is happening now, the Earth is exploding. Every day we hear about floods and fires and so on and so on. How can we meet these challenges? Also with the help of computer technology. So what I'm trying to say is, from a philosophical point of view, if we try to understand the time in which we live, you and me and so on. I put as a horizon of understanding, I would say, in hermeneutic terms, the digital. It is too small because the digital is a perspective of nature of ourselves too, but it is not the complete perspective. So maybe if we're able to change the horizon of understanding and let, for instance, from time to time, let nature, physis, as the Greek call it, or the earth, be the horizon of understanding of our society and not the digital. Or I could put it another way, the digital is just one perspective for understanding ourselves, but not the whole thing. That would be, if we are able to manage this, just in some way to relativize the absoluteness of the digital, which is now, I think, more and more taking place in our societies, with very good impact, and of course it is important for everything. But maybe I can put it in another way. It is not technology itself, it is the belief, almost a religious belief in technology, which is problematic. I think this is a problem. Also because in secular societies, there is a void concerning the religion, although religions are very important in the world, but in secular societies, it doesn't take the role it took in other ages. So if we put our faith too strongly in science and technology, and that it becomes some kind of ersatz religion, then it's not good. It's not good. Of course, we have to use all kinds of vaccines, and it was fantastic. It was the science to create it with a vaccine against COVID. And sometimes we should make stronger the belief in vaccines so that people really get vaccinated. Okay, I am not arguing against science or against technology and so on. It is just, again, the spirit of time, and how to take a distance, not from science and technology itself, but from the faith in science and technology. It's something kind of, irrational perspective on that. And something that the Frankfurt School in Germany spoke about many years ago, Adorno and so on the Janus phase of the Aufklärung, of the Enlightenment. So we live in an age of digital enlightenment. Yes, I think that is right, as Kant would say. It is not an enlightened age, digital age, it is the age of digital enlightenment. And so the challenge is how do we want to live and become and stay free persons in this age. At the time of Kant, it was of course another situation because it was Newton. And Newton and the whole issue was that if you believe in nature as a field of where causes and determinism reigns, then is no space for freedom. This was a challenge Kant was facing. Where is freedom in the Newton world? And my question is, where is freedom in the digital world? It's a similar situation, but we cannot repeat Kant because Kant had no idea of computers at that time, of course. The challenge was Newton and determinism. And so I think we need a deep philosophical discussion on these issues. Yeah.
Rafael, you said to us a moment ago that we have forgotten nature. Have we forgotten the self?
The self, yeah. The self is not the I, it's not the ego. It is the self with others. We are a self with others. Yeah. Hannah Arendt said truth is possible only between two, at least between two. There's no truth between our ego. So the self, in this sense, is the self that is being created facing the other. So this is also main insight of Hegel and other persons. Also think about Levinas, for instance. And so, yes, the question is, how do we have this experience of the self, the social self, in the digital age? Again, the horizon of the digital age, the impact of the digital age, and we see it everyday life in schools, in the families and so on, that people are becoming more and more isolated with communication technology. This is very strange. I went walking around here the corner and I saw 7 or 8 young people, all of them looking at the cell phone. They were not talking to each other, they were just looking at the cell phone. It's okay, maybe it's fine. I don't want to say it is completely wrong, but it's just what you see when you go out of the house and you see the people all the time with the cell phones. It's a kind of addiction. Yeah. And maybe we need a very detailed analysis of different kinds of addictions in the digital age, and different kinds of wrongdoings and well-doings, some kind of different view of medicine and medical perspective on ourselves and our bodies, which it is not just a question of ethics. Huh? It is broader than that and deeper than that. It's an anthropological question. It is an ontological question also, what things are, what we believe things are, and so on. It's a political question too. Yeah.
Rafael, say we progress down a path where we invite technology not just lugged around, where I carry the devices, but I also wear the devices on my body or in my apparel, on my necklace, and perhaps I invite that technology because of medical requirements, a heart pacemaker, or by choice for entertainment or ease of access. Yeah. And we start to invite technology into the body. Do you see the question, are there limits to what we can do with technology, as a viable question, as an ethicist and as a philosopher? Or do you think the world always thinks that limits are negative? Tell us about limits. Do they exist? Should they exist?
Should they do? Of course, there are always limits for everything. Yeah, so this is not one example. But I remember the discussion we had in Wollongong at that time. There was a guy from the United States who was wearing an IT device in his body, in his hand, so that he could open the door of the garage in the United States without a key. And it was very new at that time. And we wrote, when I was working at the European Group on Ethics in Brussels, we wrote an opinion about ICT in the digital body, ICT in the body, the limits and so on. And one of the issues we discussed at that time, but it was 10 years ago, is if you have the possibility that other people have connection to the ICT device in your body, not on your body, in your body, is it fine for you? Is it fine for society that everybody can hack your ICT device in your body? Also with other devices that become now ICT devices, were not until now that. And we discussed very deeply all these issues, and also saw where to draw the line concerning when do you need a legal permission to do different things that you normally shouldn't do it because it is too dangerous for you and for society. And so we discussed this also from the perspective of the ground law of a society. I remember that some of us were a little bit uncomfortable giving too much power to the law. But other people said, if we don't let the law intervene in specific situations, then we will have a chaos in which everybody will have access to everybody and so on. So it was also the question of ICT devices in your body and on your body. And the issue was, as far as I remember, also a question of natural sciences, as far as the signals coming to the ICT devices in your body can destroy your body when you come in and come out. And some people said at that time, this is a limit of the physical and the body itself, because if it is just a couple of meters, it will work, but if it goes for a longer distance, it will destroy your body. And they said, this is a physical law, so forget it, okay, because it will destroy it. So we had very, very interesting discussions about this, but it was a little bit theoretical. But at that time, it was not possible to imagine what is possible now. And maybe what is possible now is less the digital devices in your body than on your body. And this is what we said with this issue. We have it all the time. And so people say, oh, don't worry, you can throw it away or forget it at home and so on and so on. And so it makes it easier to forget the issues of surveillance because it is in your body. But I suppose that medical doctors are very interested in having access, digital access, online access to different kinds of devices that they implant in your body, maybe with good reasons, also from the psychological point of view. You know, these kind of devices, when people are left from the jail and they should use a kind of device on their body, not in their body. Maybe they should use it in their body, but then you have the question of the legal aspect, because it goes into the liberty and freedom of person. So I think there's a huge perspective to discuss from the legal and ethical and political point of view, but also from the economic point of view. And we're creating different kinds of groups of society of people who will be willing to pay for this, and people who are not willing to pay for this, and so on. We'll just also with regard now to the ecological crisis. I can imagine that would be also with regard to COVID. That all these issues will come up in the next years like an explosion. With different kind of devices, the industry is going to create everything on that. So I see this is a challenge of information ethics, I think, in the next years. Yeah.
You participated between 1998 and 2004 in the IGI, looking at ethical aspects in science and tech, and some of the opinion pieces were on human tissue banking, human embryos, healthcare in the information society, doping in sport, human stem cell research and use, patenting inventions involving human stem cells, clinical research in developing countries, genetic testing in the workplace, cord blood stem cell banks, and of course the ones that we just mentioned on ICT implants in the human body. And you did this more than 15 years ago, in fact, 20 years ago. And I find that remarkable in the group of ethicists and other applied persons in practice. What do you think some of the areas to study for the next 10 to 20 years might be, Rafael? Is it more of this or is it different?
If you don't just reduce this question to this specific group, which is now changed a little bit, but it's still there in the IGI in Brussels. But for other groups, also political bodies, not only the academia. So we have to make a difference between the working these kind of questions in the academia, where you have more or less freedom to think what you want and to write what you want and so on, with limits. Okay, there are some limits also in the academia. Okay. But legal limits and so on. So you are not allowed to speak whatever you want. In principle, you can do it, but you have to do it in a very specific way. Okay. But if you do it in a political body, this was my experience in Brussels. then you have the framework of this political body around you. So the same sentence that you say in a seminar in the university is not the same sentence that you say when you say it in a group, in a political body, advising the politicians and so on. So this means that many issues that can be doing research in the academia, which are much broader and long-range issues, because you have no constraints now in the academia. So we have to solve immediately this problem, of course. But in the political body, they want solutions for problems which are now there. And so the issues are contingent. They're changing very quickly. Also because the industry is creating new devices all the time and so on. Also in the field of artificial intelligence and new software and so on and so on. What is possible, what is not possible now, in 1 year, it is possible again. So to answer your question, I think this we have to open our eyes to what's going on in the industry, who is doing what for whom or not, who is being excluded implicitly or explicitly. These are the ethical issues. What kind of, what I said in the book about Mandela, of heterotopian spaces. Heterotopian, I mean spaces like the jail, which is a closed world with own rules and so on, which was Robben Island in the case of Mandela, 27 years living there in this closed space. And it was the apartheid state of South Africa, which is also a heterotopian state. So maybe in our society, we have to be very careful not to create closed worlds with own rules, because this will dismantle and explode the whole society. And I see now at the moment, with the many impact of world wars and people coming from different countries and so on, immigrations, it is really a difficult issue how our free societies, democratic society, will deal with all these issues, because many people will say, no, we stay in a closed world, cultural world partly, and we are not going to adapt to a new society we will live in. And this is, I think, a challenge, at least for European countries at the moment. We have 1 million people coming from migration. You remember that Angela Merkel opened the doors to get immigration, 1 million people. And she said, I think we can do it. Ich glaube, wir schaffen es, she said. And indeed, we did a lot of work for that, but it is not completed. And I think it's not only a problem of Germany. You could look in France and in England and other countries too, outside Europe, of course, also in your country, in Australia and so on. And the issue is, how will all this belong together also with using the media, the ICT media? I have no idea, really, I have no idea. And I think this should be done in political bodies and in the academia, and also in everyday life. Of course, in schools and research and universities, yes.
This leads to my next question on the turbulent environment we live in, the complex environment, the entangled and meshed environment, this hiddenness in our current practices. You know, we lack visibility. Things are covert, unobtrusive. They are black boxes. They are non-disclosed instead of disclosed. They are not transparent instead of transparent. They are lacking in our consent, perhaps. But Rafael, how do we respond as a people, as a society, as a world to complexity? What are some of your ideas about how we face this challenge that we've created ourselves almost? We are responsible for this challenge, but now how do we respond to this challenge that we've created for ourselves?
I answer you as a philosopher, if I may.
Please.
This is a question of truth. and freedom, but of course of truth in society. And what I've learned from last century discussions on theory of science, particularly the questions stated by Karl Popper, was that that we don't have a scientist an absolute basis for science. That science is something that can always be questioned and falsified, as he said. So, not the verification of results makes something absolute and universal, but the possibility of questioning it and falsifying it. You say the word falsifying in English?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. So it was a big challenge for traditional science coming from the 19th century, from positivism, with the idea there is the truth. It's just a kind of substitute from religious truth and for scientific truth. The positivists of the 19th century believed strongly in this kind of scientific truth, and this made the scientists free. So this revolution. So. An analogy, if we can manage to do similar things, but with caution in the arena of social communication. Of course, behind this, I saw a discussion about fake news and so on. I don't want to go in this direction now, but it is a symptom that in our complex world, we have in some way to see some kind, I use this word with a lot of, I guess, not relativism, but some kind of caution when stating something as being absolute true or no question of relativizing this. And this is difficult for democratic societies to do this because the limits of the democratic societies are given by specific laws, and how to deal also socially and personally, because not everybody has the strength and the capacity to live without some kind of fixed point in your life, some kind of absolute, religious or whatever kind. We all have our dark sides or hidden aspects of our lives and so on. So Heidegger used the word of aletheia, which means that something is discovered but also closed or hidden. So this is a concept, and it's not really a concept of truth, it is a concept of existential living that I'm not completely, how could I say, transparent to myself. Yeah, myself, which is Freud, of course, and then consciousness and so on. Also, the body is something that I cannot understand completely, and of course the medical doctors cannot understand the body also completely, so they have always the problems. And so at a social level we have some ways of doing with that in some way in the medical fields, in the political fields, but there are some tendencies in the other way to get very strong on a truth and becomes a political ideology or fanaticism and so on. And this is why I think philosophical issues are important for everyday life, also for these kind of issues. If we manage to, what scientists did with their own science, with their own view of science, to question their basis. This was a fantastic advance of science in my view. Can we do something similar in societies, also with the idea of democracy and communication in the digital age? How would this look like without coming into chaos, into fake news, into make America strong again or whatever, which is absurd, of course, because we have to make other people stronger because they are very weak. So he just changed the word, make weaker people strong again. That would be a nice word for President of the United States. But I think this is the issue that we face now. And because IT is so strong, and people want to be strong because they are weak. Normally we will say, why I want to be strong? Well, you want to be strong because you're weak. This is why you're looking for power. But there are different ways of dealing with the weaker. And this is, I think, something we should promote in our world. Turn our use towards the weaker, and whatever kind of children or disabled or whatever, minorities, whatever kind. It would manage to create an atmosphere worldwide that we are all of us working together to help the weak. Maybe we could change a little bit a better world, but it is now become a little bit too almost too religious when I say that. I don't want to become a religious guru about this. It's just very simple, just trying to say what I see.
That is really beautiful. And you hear this now in value-sensitive design, in systems theory and socio-technical systems design, where people are talking about care by design, especially in robotics, when you're talking about social robotics, for example. And so what you've said to me is the pinnacle, I think, of where society should be striving. That's my personal interpretation anyhow. But I wanted to ask you, dovetailing on this beautiful summation, before we go to question time, what are your thoughts as a scholar on transdisciplinarity? And do we need it? Why is it important if you think we need it? And how does it look to you when we talk about transdisciplinarity?
My experience in Brussels was a very good experience in transdisciplinarity. So we were 12 people, different specialities and biologists and lawyers, philosophers, and so on and so on. And we were dealing with one problem. So transdisciplinarity means everybody's looking at one issue that we are dealing with and with one problem. It's less a question of the disciplines as such, but it's discipline, where are you looking at when you are doing interdisciplinary research and transdisciplinary research. And it was at that time in this small group with only 12 people, very interesting, because it was a problem of translation. Not only because we were 12 people with different languages in Europe, but also speaking some of them Italian and French or German or whatever, and trying to speak in English with automatic translation at the same time who we spoke into English or French. And also because of the issues, I learned a lot in these years about biology. Incredible. I had no idea at the beginning how much I didn't know about all these issues, particularly stem cells. Was the first opinion. It was extremely difficult. We took 1.5 years to write down what we wanted to say. Is it possible to have a utilitarian perspective on stem cells? Yes or no? You know, these questions, yes or no, are very tricky because there are many. If you put a question yes or no, it is the wrong question normally. It depends on the context, it depends on what, and so on and so on. And so we had wonderful people like Anne McLaren, who's one of the most important experts from the UK in stem cells. And we had lawyers and so on and so on. So everybody was talking about this from his or her own perspective. And we got to put all these views into an opinion and make some suggestions for the European community, for the European, for the President of the European Commission. And one interesting thing was that it was possible, if you do not agree with the result of the opinion, it was possible to put a caveat from one of the persons and said, I don't agree. In this case, it was really one person who didn't agree, because we were a very liberal group, and we said, well, depending on that, it's a little bit sophisticated what we wrote at that time. You can read it a little bit later. And one of them said, not at all. And so this was put inside too, so that we were not deciding instead of the politicians. We gave them to the President of the European Commissions and to the Parliament and said, okay, you have to decide, not we. We just investigate these issues and we open different kinds of possibilities, but the decisions should be taken at the Parliament, not at the ethics group. And this separation was very, very important. I think this is for a transdisciplinarity group very important, just to analyze different views. Let some people say, I don't agree at all with that. I want to state clearly that I not agree. And then present it to the people who have to take the decisions. Yeah, this is, I think, the issue I would promote in the politics and science.
Rafael, I want to let the audience know you've worked in Asia on robotics themes and for different visiting universities all over the world. You've done the project on ethic bots and Etica. You're with the EIC, of the founding EIC for so many decades, of the International Review of Information Ethics, which now has been wonderfully hosted and taken by Jared Bilby, who's online. For those who don't know Jared, we'll introduce him in a moment. But there's so much that you've contributed, and I know you'll keep writing. I'm cognizant of time ticking, and I want the audience to be able to ask you direct questions. So I'm going to stop personally and invite from the floor, but from me, Rafael, thank you for your incredible contributions to us, which we desperately need in this time and day and age. I know you're a lover of books, and so am I, but I encourage everyone, as I put items in the chat, to access your documents online. You've got your PowerPoints on your website, you've got PDFs galore. You really have opened up the knowledge that you've assisted with others to create, and I appreciate that so much. But I just want to thank you, from me to you, from the school to you, from the center to you, for coming online today. And I will now pass on